Peace and Safety Radar Check. My name is Daniel Vallis and welcome to our channel. I hope you've been able to go outside the past few days and look up and lift up your heads either in the evening or in the morning, but especially in the morning to see the beautiful morning stars of Venus and Jupiter, also Mars and Saturn, but also just to take a view of the heavens, the celestial heavens, what the heavens declare about this time. The celestial sign that we saw the other day was just a further reminder to look up, to lift up our heads, because there is a tapestry of redemption that is being declared with words, a speech, a handiwork, a demonstration of knowledge along the line, the celestial line that is described in Psalm 19. And friend, that is really what I hope you see when you go outside and look up. Not just singular events of, oh, there's Jupiter and Venus, and this is a rare singular conjunction that's going to happen just today. I want you to see the whole heavens. I want you to see the words. I want you to see the speech. I want you to see the demonstration of knowledge, because that is what is declared along the line. And so praise the Lord for all that He has shown us on this celestial learning journey, all the nuggets of wisdom, all the celestial sights that He has shown us. So many things when we look up that make us ponder, why has He considered us? Why has He considered us? Why has He demonstrated His love toward us? That is the tapestry of redemption, and that is part of the glory of God that we should be reminded about when we look up and we lift up our heads. For our redemption draweth nigh, the one who redeemed us, the one who purchased us. And so friends, the other day on April 30th, early in the morning, I had actually set my alarm clock for, I think it was 4:30, but the Lord actually woke me up about 4 o'clock in the morning, which was really good, because that enabled me to get ready and then to drive out to the field and get in place just in time for Jupiter and Venus to be coming up over the treetops. It is really perfect, actually getting there 30 minutes earlier than what I was even planning on waking up at. So it's just amazing to see the personal side of how our Lord is working and guiding on the celestial learning journey. He is the one who wants us to look up. He is the one who has things that He wants to show us, because He is the one who wants us to know the time and that our redemption draweth nigh. And so that is what colors our celestial learning journey in such a beautiful way, and that we need to be reminded about oftentimes, is that it's a personal journey. He wants us to know, and He is the one who has guided us and shown us and given us incredible wisdom. Praise His name. And when we look up and lift up our heads, it should not just, again, recall the singular events, but the celestial journey. What has our Father shown us? Not just in the past day or week or month or year even. What has He shown us over the past few years? Prophetically, the last generation, everything coming together. The peace and safety calls, the Star of Bethlehem events, the Revelation 12 sign, studying and learning and seeing the beauty of the celestial clock, what our Creator has put in the heavens for us to see, the prophecy that He explains multiple times over in the Gospels, how the Son of Man tells us exactly how He's coming. He makes it very clear, because it's very important that He wants us to know when He is coming. We will not know the exact day or the exact hour, but we are told we will see the day approaching, and we will know that our redemption is nigh, even at the doors. And because we know that He is nigh, that's why we need to be watching. That's why we need to be sober. But understanding that it's going to be a process over time, particularly within a generation. There's going to be people who are watching for the celestial and prophetic events over decades, over scores of years even. And here we are at the latter portion of the last generation. We certainly see that prophetic time is short and the peace and safety calls have gone out. The world has seen a whole bevy of rare celestial signs that particularly remind us of the Star of Bethlehem, the coming of the Messiah, the Revelation 12 sign, everything that has brought us to where we are right now. When we look up, particularly at the last page of the Bible portrayals with the one who pours out the living water, the bright and morning star, the one who came to redeem the fish. All this is brought to mind when we look up right at this very late hour. We are not seeing a singular event. We are seeing a story. That is what we need to remember when we go outside and look up. We are seeing a story. And so it does us good when we go outside and look up to stay a while, look around, and ponder and reflect and review on all that our Creator has shown us and why He has brought us here. Reflect on the journey over the years and all the different videos that He's guided us to create, and just showing all these different aspects, going all the way back to Leo, and Jupiter's all the way back in Leo back in 2015. And He has shown us the celestial learning journey, a tapestry of redemption, a continuous story that has brought us to the last page of the Bible. And so the other day when I was outside early in the morning, way earlier than I normally get up, it is neat just in all that quiet time and stillness of the world around you, just be able to look up. And I saw Jupiter and Venus, and that was beautiful, but I was actually more captivated by the Milky Way and Scorpius and Ophiuchus, and just reminded about the beautiful portrayals of the one who's going to be making his enemies his footstool. And it just really stood out to me how brightly Scorpius was shining, and Ophiuchus was so clear, right at the Milky Way throne of God picture with Sagittarius about to release his arrow against the adversary. There were multiple pictures of the prophetic promises that I saw when I looked up and I looked at my head at the time of the bright and morning star reminders, right at the one who pours out the living water. Being reminded of the whole story. And this is why it's important to look at the story so that we hear the words, so we hear the speech. We're at a time where even the world has been talking about these celestial signs and posting them on social media, and our local weatherman has been keeping everybody abreast of the celestial movements and the stars that are seen in the morning, and even posting different photos from people who send them in. The world has noticed these celestial events, these bright and morning stars, the planets in a line with Mars and Saturn also. The world has been looking up, but do they hear the speech? Do they hear the words? Do they see the knowledge? Do they see the handiwork? Do they see the story declaring the glory of God? And that our redemption is drawing nigh, the one who is coming quickly. The very portrayals in the last page of the Bible, do they see that? Do we see that? Do we call that to mind when we look up, when we lift up our heads? These reminders are still going on right now during these days. I hope you get a chance to look at them and just be reminded of all that our Father is showing us. Because it also reminded me, as I stood out there on the hill, it reminded me of the wise men. How, when they saw the star again, they weren't just seeing a singular event. They weren't just saying, oh, look, there's a star that's standing still. It's over Bethlehem. Oh, let's get excited. No, that was not what got them excited. They got excited because they saw the star again. They remembered the story. They remembered the words. From a year and a half before that, they had been observing different rare celestial events around Regulus and Leo. They had observed the whole story right at a prophetic expected time for the one who would come, the Messiah, the Prince who would come. They were at an expected time. They saw the celestial signs. They saw a whole bevy of signs, a story. And when they saw the star again, they were reminded of the story. And that is what got them so excited, to see the timeliness of where they were approaching Bethlehem, about to meet Messiah. They had been directed again by prophecy, by the information that they picked up at the last moment, when they were told that Scripture foretold the Messiah would be born in Bethlehem. And so as they went forward on this new information for them, they saw the star again. And it was going forward in that opportunity of faith, going forward on faith, where they put legs on their faith. That's when this celestial event appeared and reminded them of the timeliness of the one who had been guiding them on the journey, the one who drew their attention to the celestial signs, the one who has brought them the information that they needed right when they needed it. And that's why they were filled with exceeding great joy. When they saw the star again, they were reminded of the story, reminded of the one who guided them on the journey. Even reminded of his very presence at the very last mile. And this is what we should be excited about as we look up and we lift up our heads. We see his hand at work guiding us. When we see the celestial events, Jupiter and Venus, a conjunction which reminds us of the Star of Bethlehem event, which was exactly a conjunction of Jupiter and Venus right near the head of Leo the Lion. The Star of Bethlehem events that happened in 2015. And we just saw this star again. A reminder of it very powerfully as the bright and morning stars. And in context and seeing how our Father has led us to this very late hour, we can be excited because we know it's a personal journey, because he wants us to know that he is nigh even at the doors. And friends, that's what I want you to see. There's a whole host of different channels and different watchmen out there, and there's a whole lot of information you can glean, but do not lose sight of the story. Do not lose sight of the speech and the words that declare the glory of God, that declare that he is nigh even at the door. There is one story. Let's not lose the forest for the trees. When we see the star again, we are reminded of the story. And just like the wise men, they got excited because they knew that they were nigh even at the doors of the Messiah themselves too. And likewise us, when we look up, And that's what we should be reminded of, that he is coming quickly. Behold, I come quickly. Surely I come quickly. These are the reminders that we have as we look up, but also presently on this learning journey, we have seen other things recently that are called to mind when we look up at this very time too. And this is what was called to my mind when I was out on the hill looking up, and particularly over at Scorpius in that direction, because I was reminded of the importance of that celestial part of the celestial clock, that part of the story with prophecy and where we are right now, because that part deals with his adversary, the one who's going to be made his footstool. And so as I looked at the celestial events over on my left, over there in the east with Jupiter and Venus, I also looked over there toward the southwest at Scorpius and considered how these two went together. That's what I saw, a story of how these go together. I wasn't just looking at the one, I was noticing the importance of what I saw on the right was just as important as what I saw on the left. Because their stories, their speech, their words go together. It's all part of the same story. And I was particularly reminded back at the end of 2021, we were reminded of the celestial event with the total solar eclipse that took place right there at Scorpius, right at the head of Scorpius, right at the foot of Ophiuchus. And that was a prophetic warning, remember? A prophetic sign that told us the great and terrible day of the Lord is approaching. I will show wonders in the heavens and in the earth, blood and fire and pillars of smoke. The sun shall be turned into darkness, and the moon into blood, before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And so this was called to mind when I looked at Scorpius and just reminded of how we saw the sun turned into darkness, the total solar eclipse that took place over there in Scorpius. But it also reminded me of the moon being turned into blood, which we also saw. We saw that on November 19th of 2021, the partial lunar eclipse that took place right next to Pleiades, the 7 stars that are mentioned right at the beginning of Revelation. And our attention has been brought to the last page of the book of Revelation. It was technically a partial lunar eclipse, although it was only about 1% away from being a total lunar eclipse. So to the naked eye, it was really a total lunar eclipse. And this happened right next to Pleiades. And you may remember our videos from back then. Just, again, a beautiful night when the Lord drew our attention to the celestial sight. Also in line with Sirius and Orion, with his great and terrible sword, reminded about the day of the Lord that is coming. That was November 19th, and then just 2 weeks later was the total solar eclipse, the sun being turned into darkness on December 4th, 2021. And when the total solar eclipse happened with its corona, it briefly blotted out the sun, and the world could see Mercury and even Antares, the heart of the scorpion, Scorpius, right there. And so on these rare celestial events, right pointing to the very story of the prophetic expectation of our Lord about to start making his enemies his footstool, the celestial signs point directly at that part of the story. And it took place exactly right at his foot, which is right on the heart of Scorpius. Very undeniably how the heavens were drawing attention through handiwork, a demonstration of knowledge, a specific choreography to this celestial part of the story, right here at the end of the last generation. Right before the great and terrible day of the Lord starts. Right here, this visual declaration. We were reminded in Hebrews 9, so Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for him, shall he appear the second time without sin unto salvation. We were reminded he sat down on the right hand of God from henceforth, expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. That's still the prophetic chapter that's coming. That is the next chapter. Prophecy was going to be on hold from his ascension, where he sat down at the right hand of the throne of God, till when prophecy is going to be picking up, when he's going to finish what he started. And the Apostle Paul emphasizes, we will see that day approaching when he's going to start doing that again. We will see that as we look for him. As we look for him. And so this is why it's important. Just like the wise men, when they traveled out, they were not looking at just singular events with a tunnel vision. They looked at the whole story. They were looking for him to appear the first time, the prophetic time, and they were brought on a celestial learning journey, with special attention brought to the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the one who would come. We are also looking for him to appear the second time that the church has seen him, since he went away at ascension, when he then sat down at the right hand of God. And as we look for him, we will see a speech, a words, a story, a demonstration of knowledge, a handiwork, a choreography, just like the wise men, that will show and tell us that the great and terrible day of the Lord is about to come. There is going to be a sign that tells this story. It's going to have those words. It's going to have that speech before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. Not after. That would be after the point. It's going to be before the day. And so this is what we have seen recently, back in November of 2021 and December, right in context of an escalation of the peace and safety calls too. And so as we look at the recent celestial signs with the conjunction of Jupiter and Venus, we also see in the heavens reminder of, oh yes, what happened at that portion of the celestial clock that tells us what is coming up. The great and terrible day of the Lord is coming. The sudden destruction is coming. The snare is coming. And so as we see the celestial signs on the clock, we know that time is running out, which is why the Apostle Paul emphasizes, as you see the day approaching, you're going to see yourself running out of those days and hours. It's approaching. You're running out of time. You're running out of the approach. There will come a day when it finishes its approach. And so this is the story that we keep in mind as we look at the celestial signs. With every new celestial sign that we see, we need to view it in context of the story. We will not be able to fully understand why is this celestial sign happening without understanding the story. And once we understand the story, we'll be able to understand what's happening within that story. Also understanding what is the next chapter that is coming. From henceforth expecting till his enemies be made his footstool. And the sign that's going to be seen before the great and terrible day of the Lord come. And so again, just on April 30th, as I was looking at that conjunction early in the morning with the bright morning stars over in Aquarius and Pisces, I was really captivated by Scorpius because I was more reminded of, we have seen the sign there of the sun being turned into darkness and the moon into blood at that same time period. We saw the signs there that reminded us that he is not even at the door, but also reminded us what's coming, what's approaching. The great and terrible day of the Lord is coming. And now we see a celestial sign of the bright and morning star, right described on the last page of the Bible in context of, behold, I come quickly. A final reminder that he is coming quickly, right during the days of Noah and Lot, right before judgment comes. When we look at the celestial clock, we look at what's being told now, but also what has chimed out recently telling us what is coming up, which also tells us how much time we have left, with the expectation that the great and terrible day of the Lord is about to start. We are running on very borrowed time. And so as we look at Scorpius, and we look at the bright and morning stars, we are reminded of the blood moon that happened near Pleiades. We are also reminded of a blood moon that is coming up very soon, in just a few days. Again, keeping it in context of what has the story been declared in the heavens already, that is foretold is going to happen before the great and terrible day of the Lord comes. Then a celestial sign with bright and morning stars, right in context, behold, I come quickly. And that's going to be followed by one more blood moon, which also reminds us of the great and terrible day approaching. On May 15th, 16th, will be another total lunar eclipse, and this will be a blood moon. The total phase of this blood moon total lunar eclipse will be visible from across North and South America, plus parts of Europe and Africa. So this will also be a blood moon, a very full blood moon, but mostly visible in North America and South America. But this blood moon is going to be very fascinating, calls a lot of things in mind, because this is going to be happening right at Scorpius too, right at the head and claws of Scorpius. About 3 hours after sunset on the 15th, that is when the blood moon is going to be fully red, but it will be seen right at Scorpius. You'll be able to see Antares and the familiar curly shape of Scorpius. So this will really stand out. Again, the world seeing a red blood moon right at the particular point on the celestial clock that the heavens pointed to back a few months ago, reminding us the great and terrible day of the Lord is coming, where he's going to start making his enemies his footstool, and that is portrayed by him treading on the scorpion, the very one who bruised his heel in the first place. This upcoming blood moon has a lot of words and speech to it that is going to be declaring too. So we need to keep this in mind with what have we seen, telling us that great and terrible day of the Lord is coming, and then bright morning star reminder that he is coming quickly, followed by this sign, reminding us again of the great and terrible day of the Lord. Bringing attention back to the same spot that the heavens brought our attention to back in December of 2021, when the total solar eclipse took place just a little bit right near Antares, the heart of the Scorpion. The heavens are drawing our attention to a particular place because that is the next chapter that is about to start. When we look along the line, the blood moon is going to be happening late on the 15th into the 16th, right at the head of Scorpius, the claws of Scorpius. But also take note of where Jupiter is. That's at the second fish of Pisces. And the sun is right between Aries and Pleiades, which is where the last blood moon took place. So again, when we look on the celestial clock, when we see certain celestial events the second time, that should remind us of what happened the first time, because that is part of the story. So for example, when we see a blood moon happening at Scorpius, we should be reminded, when was the last time this happened? Oh yes, that happened right near Pleiades. And right now the sun as a bridegroom is drawing nigh to Pleiades right now. The sun was pointing to Antares. That is where the total solar eclipse took place at the foot of Ophiuchus. Remember, the sun was over there and the moon was over near Pleiades. Now the second time they've switched. The sun is drawing nigh to Pleiades and the moon is at Scorpius. Dwell on this for a second. The signs that we saw the first time, we're now seeing a reversal of them, pointing to those same objects, Pleiades and Scorpius. Pleiades and Scorpius. Now if we back up just a few days, on May 10th, that is when Jupiter will be passing the vernal equinox point, 0 degrees. So technically leaving the chamber of Aquarius and going into Pisces. An interesting transition point from the one who pours out the living water to the ones who are redeemed by the one who pours out the living water. So that takes place just 5 days before the blood moon at Scorpius. We just keep that in mind. So when that happens, Jupiter will be in Pisces. But by May 20th, not that far after that, the sun will be exactly in line with Pleiades. But a few days before that, it will be in the same position approximately that the moon was at when it was the blood moon last time. And of course, about a week or so before the sun is in line, Pleiades will be covered with the glare of the sun before that too, leading up to that. So even a little bit before the blood moon, you could even say the sun is approaching or at Pleiades just because of the glare. It's being lost in the glare. So again, these are pictures we keep in mind with the sun as a bridegroom, the one who is coming quickly. Also in context of the celestial sign that has warned us that the great and terrible day of the Lord is coming, where he's going to start standing up and making his enemies his footstool. And so right now, when you go outside, look up and lift up your heads at the morning stars of Venus and Jupiter and Mars and Saturn. Also look at Scorpius. Look at Ophiuchus right above that too. Be reminded of the celestial signs that came with a warning of what is coming. But then also that tempers our understanding of we are about to see some signs, a parallel, a second time, very, very soon. And that further reminds us we are running out of time. So we must have a soberness. We are running out of the days and hours. We see that day approaching. And this is why you need to review the timeline. You can find links in the description box. Because this really gives you a large picture, a larger idea of the story. Instead of just hearing words and speech and losing them in the confusion, look at the whole forest. Again, when was the last time we saw a true blood moon? That was back on November 19, 2021. We see another one upcoming on May 15th, 2022. And a very interesting train of events that have happened since it was seen the first time. We can see that it's coming up a second time. And if the first time was a warning of a great and terrible day approaching, we should expect that there is great significance when it's seen a second time. The next time that that sign appears again. Now the sun will not be turned into blackness. There was a partial solar eclipse the other day in combination with this total blood moon, but it's not going to be a unique combo like what happened back in November and December. That's what made that a unique sign, and we covered that in some of our recent videos. That was the sign described in Joel, particularly pointing at his adversary and that he's about to start making his enemies his footstool. So a very powerful, laden celestial sign, but we see a reminder of that sign coming up, another blood moon. This is the next blood moon since then. And again, we've seen a lot in the world suddenly change and ramp up. We've seen the world go crazy ever since that celestial sign of the sun and the moon. The great and terrible day of the Lord approaching. The world has been reacting as though that's happening because the enemy doesn't know what time it is. We've talked about that in our recent videos too. But we've also observed a particular parallel happening within this window. The Lord has given so much wisdom about the Pilgrim parallel that is happening since that celestial sign. Exactly since that celestial sign with the blood moon. Because we are past the 400th anniversary of the nation foretold by Jesus Christ, of the nation that would bring forth fruit for him. It would be different than the Hebrews. It would be a Gentile nation that would be covenanted to God, that would bring forth fruit for him. The church, particularly through the pilgrims. And we've covered this a lot in our recent videos too. The anniversary in 1620, the 400th anniversary was in 2020. That went into 2021 with the whole chain of events. But in late 2021, started the 401st anniversary, still going into 2022. When we've studied the prophecy parallels with Abraham's seed, after 400 years, that nation is expected to come out of the land and judgment fall on the nation that they were strangers and pilgrims in. So this definitely calls a lot to mind. We've studied this a lot lately. The enemy is fully aware of what time it is. We saw this at Joseph Biden's inauguration with the 400 lights. They knew it was exactly right on the 400th anniversary. Time is up. It is the time of expectation for the great and terrible day of the Lord to come. That's why we've seen since then a lot of crazy events ramp up, and people have asked, have our leaders gone crazy? Everything they seem to be doing is with malice. They're acting very strange all of a sudden. And it's because they know exactly what time it is, and why we've heard the calls of peace and safety even accelerate and go all the way to the highest levels in the world, the United Nations with the UN Security Council as well, all during this pilgrim time. So again, when we look at the timeline, review it, all these notes are right there. Look at the time frame between these two blood moons. One warned the great and terrible day of the Lord is approaching. Then we see the next instance of it and what is happening between that window. Again, we do not know the day or the hour, but when we see the celestial sign that is going to happen before it, and then we see the next iteration of that event happening, we have a suspicion that that's probably going to be pretty close to a bookend for the expectation of those events coming. We can't say for sure, but the way we see things ramping up in the world too, that also hedges our expectation that that's pretty close to the money too. We are in a ballpark season for sure, right here in the springtime. But then when we look at the pilgrim parallels that our Father has drawn our attention to, when did these start? When did the 401st parallel of the Mayflower arriving? That happened on November 21st. And remember, when did the blood moon happen? That was on November 19th. Just hours before the 401st anniversary of the Pilgrims signing the Mayflower Compact. And then we see the next blood moon on May 15th. And just a few hours later on May 16th, that is when the Mayflower arrives home in England. Arrives in the old world. Arrives back from whence they came out. So powerful reminders, being reminded of when the Mayflower arrived at the new world, but also when it arrived at the old world. And this is the same parallel that's recorded in Hebrews 11, right after Hebrews 10, which tells us we will see the day approaching, where he's going to start making his enemies his footstool. This is the very next chapter. So to see both these happening at the same time, with all that our Father has shown us, we know there's a reason for it. And so we look up, knowing that he is nigh even at the door. And we are excited with exceeding great joy at all that he is showing us. That reminds us that we are very short on time. And should definitely further remind us that we are strangers and pilgrims here. And as we see that day approaching, we better be living like it. We better be living like it, keeping in mind the promises, how he has prepared for them a city. When we set our heart and affections on things above, that's what we need to be doing here at this late hour. Being reminded we are pilgrims and strangers and living like it. And so much the more as we see the day approaching. And with the celestial signs, that reminds us of the warnings that have gone out, that we are approaching an end, where the great and terrible day of the Lord is going to start, where he's going to start making his enemies his footstool. And just like the Pilgrim parallel, they were called out after 400 years, and then judgment came on the nation where they were. So there's a lot of parallels. This is not by accident that both these signs of judgment in the heavens on the celestial clock are also lining up with the prophetic Pilgrim clock. Both of them reminding of judgment, and both of them hours apart. Hours apart. Again, we do not know the day or hour, but we know enough that this should be catching our attention. We should be sober, living like strangers and pilgrims here at this very late hour, understanding that our Lord is coming very quickly. Because we see within this time frame, that's when the 7-year warning ended. And right exactly on that day, as we've covered in our recent videos, that's when this whole fiasco in Ukraine and Russia, all that started. The world really ramping up this war rhetoric. And also the calls of peace and safety. All that building, and definitely since then, the world's really gone crazy. You can see that they are pushing for all-out war. But they cannot actually start the war because Jesus Christ will be coming during the days of Noah and Lot, while life is still going on like normal. They cannot start the war, but they are going to bring everything in the world right up to that, so it is ripe at the very day that the Son of Man cometh. And that's what he warned about. Just like the days of Noah and Lot, the same day that Noah entered into the ark, judgment came. Sudden destruction is going to start the same day that Jesus Christ comes. There will be no delay. It won't be 10 days later, 20 days later, 30 days later. No, it will be the same day. And that's what Christ repeatedly emphasized. It will happen the same day. So that's why the world's making the world ripe, those conditions ripe, so that when he does come on that day, there will be no delay. There will be no delay. The snare will spring. The restraint will be removed. And all the plagues that are warned about on the last page of the Bible will go into effect right away. The snare trap will be triggered and will be engaged. And that is the great and terrible day of the Lord that is approaching. That is what the celestial heavens have been warned about. That's what even the Pilgrim prophecy warns about. This is what we should see as the story. Being reminded, echoing in our ears when we look up and we lift up our heads. Reminded of the story, reminded of the warnings, reminded to be sober. When we zoom in, we don't have time to go over all these events, but if we just look at just the past 15 days, if we are approaching a tipping point, if they are getting the world ripe for an expectation of everything to hit the fan, then we should see them accelerating, particularly as we reach this next iteration of a blood moon, which is going to be very important because it's happening right at Scorpius, right at the head of Scorpius. And that is what we see, the world building up, especially over the past few days. And I'm just going to hit some of the highlights, but if you just look, again, look at the timeline, zoom in on it, read it. If we just look at the past 15 days, there are 15 specific warnings where the world is really getting the world's attention about nuclear war, really emphasizing that things are ripe for nuclear war. April 22nd, Victoria Nuland warns Russia of astronomical nuclear price if tactical nuclear weapons are used. And these are public statements by high governmental officials. They are the ones who keep bringing the subject up. They are the ones who keep stirring the pot on these subjects. Because they are the ones who are pushing for it, and they want the world to live in fear of expectation of, oh, things are about to hit the fan. Germany's Scholz says, I will do everything to avoid an escalation that could lead to World War III. There can be no nuclear war. So they keep talking about, oh, we don't want to be the reason for it, but we're going to keep stirring the pot and keep throwing gasoline on the fire too. But they keep bringing up to the public's consciousness what is the result of where things are going. It's going to be World War III. If things keep progressing at the rate that they're going, it's going to end up at World War III. And they're not actually doing anything to slow it down. They're actually doing things to speed it up. They're giving lip service to, oh, well, no, we're not going to be responsible for it. But everything they're doing says the direct opposite. They are the ones who are pushing for it. On the 23rd, Russian Ministry of Defense dismisses CIA director's claims on Moscow's possible use of nuclear weapons in Ukraine. So high governmental officials in the U.S. make claims about nuclear weapons of Russia, and Russia has to respond to that. So all this is in the news constantly, of one side accusing the other, oh, you're going to use nuclear weapons. Oh, no, we're not. And that's going back and forth, but it's at high levels going on right now. The Russian space chief warns destruction of spacecraft could be likely trigger for World War III. And so they keep reminding the world's audience, how close are we to World War III breaking out? They keep reminding the world we are a whole lot closer to things hitting the fan, and if they do, it's going to spiral out of control really quickly too. Notice that. They keep emphasizing how things can be going life as normal, but it won't take much for things to suddenly hit the fan. They know they cannot start World War III, but they know they can bring things pretty close to the expectation of it breaking out any day will be. On the 25th, Lavrov, the risks of nuclear war are now very significant. There are many who are willing to artificially inflate this threat. The danger is serious. It is real. It cannot be underestimated. And so, again, Lavrov is having to address, yes, there's other sides, such as NATO and the EU, the UK and US, they keep artificially inflating this threat of nuclear war, which means that as long as they keep artificially inflating this threat, the threat is going to be very real, which is why we're having to be on nuclear high alert, because they are the ones inflating the threat. They are the ones threatening it. And so he's bringing attention publicly that, yes, this is a very real threat because you have multiple parties who are inflating the threat. They're not trying to make it better. They're trying to make it worse. The same day, North Korea parade shows the Hwasong-17 ICBM and hypersonic missiles. It threatens nuclear strikes if provoked. The 27th, Putin. Russia won't hesitate to use weapons that no other country possesses to defend itself and against interfering in the Ukraine conflict. So again, not only are they pointing out the other side keeps ramping up inflating the nuclear threats, but Putin and Russia has to likewise counter, you're inflating these threats, we will respond to your threats with even worse than your threats if you keep threatening us. And so just tit for tat going back and forth, but in very public dialogue by very high governmental leaders. Russian media, TV propaganda chiefs openly mention how nuclear war is most probable outcome. And this is on a very state-aligned TV program there in Russia where they were openly talking that things are likely heading toward nuclear war, World War III. They're keeping the world's audience with the understanding that this is going to be a natural result of the way things are going. A natural result. It's just going to be unavoidable at this point. That things are going to result in World War III, a nuclear war. They're priming the pump in multiple ways to explain what is about to come, too. The 28th, Russian TV media again. One Sarmat ICBM missile and the British Isles will be no more. So they're publicly boasting, even on state-aligned TV, that it's just going to take one ICBM missile with multiple independent warheads and the British Isles, the UK, will be gone. So while the Russian government says that the US and them are artificially inflating it, the Russian propaganda is not helping the situation either. On the 29th, further work is seen at North Korea's nuclear test site, and it's strongly suspected that they're about to have another nuclear test. A third party, this isn't Russia and Ukraine, this is North Korea. There's multiple countries bringing this and keeping this on the front burner in the world right now. Lavrov, Russia is not threatening anyone with nuclear war, it is the West, along with Ukraine, which flirts with the rhetoric of nuclear war. Again, constantly bringing up this subject. What is the expected end result? Nuclear war. Nuclear war. On the 30th, North Korean leader vows to preemptively contain nuclear threats by hostile forces. And notice preemptively, meaning they take a first strike potentially with their nuclear weapons. So this isn't anywhere near the Cuban Missile Crisis or something like that. No, this is multiple actors who are threatening nuclear weapons, preemptive nuclear weapons use. And so they're keeping the world tense in anticipation that this could happen any day now. May 1st, Kremlin-backed media, Russian nuclear tsunami would wipe out Britain. It showed both the Sarmat ICBM and underwater drone Poseidon. Again, this TV media is getting a lot of coverage, and then it's talked about on social media how they're actually showing video clips and simulations of how Britain could be wiped off the map. So this is getting a lot of conversation going in the world. A lot of conversation. They want the world talking about it's not going to take much for World War III to break out. And if it does, it's going to be sudden destruction. Sudden destruction. May 2nd, U.S. House Representative introduces authorization for use of military force bill to allow Biden to deploy U.S. troops in Ukraine if Russia uses chemical, biological, or nuclear weapons. So they're putting that provision in there. Again, some of the legal explanations of why would one party get involved suddenly if some other party does something. They're already setting it up that if Russia does this, then the U.S. is automatically going to get involved. And so they talk about it with these legal proceedings. And they're making a very big deal about it that this is an authorization for use of military force. They're spelling out for the audience, this is what this will mean. May 4th, North Korea test launches a suspected ballistic missile, possibly a Hwasong-15. The type is unknown though, but it's definitely a ballistic missile and it was tracked. So again, after their missile launch not too long ago, they're still testing and they're increasing the number of their nuclear tests and missile tests. Also on the same day, Russia war games simulated with electronic launches nuclear-capable Iskander missile strikes. So they had a war game where they simulated launching a nuclear strike. Just a war game, just the electronic version of it, but they publicly announced that, yeah, we tested this the other day. These are war games. This is all going on right now within just the past 15 days, all this rhetoric and talk about nuclear war. So you can see how across the world the audience is being primed for the expectation of sudden destruction could break out any day now. This is what they're keeping up on the front burner, and this is just the past 15 days. 15 different incidences by very high-level government officials and state propaganda pieces, and actions as well. So there's a lot that we see just by looking at the timeline. Very recently, things are accelerating. We've heard the peace and safety calls a number of weeks ago, but the same story, the same threat is still ongoing. This is why you need to review the timeline. The peace and safety threat was warning that sudden destruction is coming. And they are explaining since then, how is that sudden destruction coming? They're actually telling you and priming the world for what the peace and safety calls warned us in Scripture would be coming. Sudden destruction. So the more that we review the timeline and see that this is on the lips and tongues of people every single day since then, we know they are expecting it to break out any day too. The great and terrible day of the Lord to come when the snare trap is engaged. Also within this time we see a narrative and world positions changing because we see a switch in power. On the 21st, the ruble is continuing to rise. Israel adds China's yuan for the first time ever, making it 2% of its financial reserves, while cutting its dollar holdings to 61% from 66.5%. Biggest currency reshuffle in a decade. And so while those numbers don't seem significant in the financial world, this caught a lot of people's attention because it marked the time that one of America's close allies was starting to distance themselves from the American dollar. And we've talked about this before. With all the sanctions that they've been suddenly putting on Russia, that has caused a loss of faith in the American dollar and American financial systems because they're not a reliable financial partner. You can't trust them because they will threaten to sanction you or freeze your foreign reserves at the drop of a hat. And so for Israel to do that as a close ally was very significant and got a lot of talk in the financial world that you are seeing a shift away from the dollar. They're not going to try to draw a lot of attention to it by making it very large, but they definitely decreased the dollar while also for the first time adding China's yuan to their reserves, making it 2% of their reserves, which is not an ally of the U.S. for sure. So there's a reshuffling in the world political scenes and in the financial scene too. We've definitely observed that. On the 26th, Russia will halt gas flows Wednesday to Poland and Bulgaria if payment is not settled in rubles. Just on that news alone, the European gas prices jumped 17% just on that risk news. So the financial world is getting to a very perilous place because Russia, just with making announcements about gas or oil, can vastly change the markets and the demand, and that has a huge ripple effect, particularly for Europe. On the 27th, Russia halts gas deliveries to Poland and Bulgaria, the EU to boost Russian gas imports through countries willing to pay in rubles. Because of all the different pipelines and interlinks, they can still get gas through another way, but they're going to run into some of those options pretty soon. By the 27th, the ruble was trading at a 52-week high. And so this is very important. You may remember at the onset of the sanctions that Biden boasted how the ruble was made rubble. And different governments were pointing out how this is greatly going to affect Russia and they'll never be able to recover from it. Well, here, just a few weeks later, the ruble is already trading at a 52-week high. Russia has quickly rebounded in spite of the sanctions. That shows you how powerful Russia is with their economy, but also because they hold the commodities. That's of the real value. And it only took about a month for the world's financial system to recognize that the Russian ruble is this year's best performing currency. The best performing currency since the sanctions. On the 29th, the first shipment of Russian coal paid in yuan arriving in China now. The first oil will be delivered in May. And so increasing purchases by China of these commodities of oil and coal and paying with it outside of the dollar-denominated transactions too. Russia's Security Council. Moscow is working on linking the price of the ruble to bullion, gold bullion, and other commodities. So they've publicly stated their Security Council, which is just a few steps underneath their president. They said, yes, we are working to tie it to the bullion and other commodities, which is part of the reason why the ruble is the best performing currency this year. May 2nd, the ruble surges to 6-month high against the dollar. 10 EU countries are technically going along with Putin's rubles for gas plan. And the more countries that are making these purchases, that increases the demand for the ruble as currency, which again gives it value. May 4th, ruble hits 2-year high against the dollar and the euro. And the very next day, the ruble nears 3-year high against dollar. The ruble is coming on very strong in spite of the sanctions. And so this brings up an interesting tipping point that the world is coming to financially also, because you're coming to a point where the different nations who are putting out the sanctions, particularly the EU and less or so the US, the average person is realizing, hey, the sanctions are hurting us way more than it's hurting Russia. Russia's actually doing great. They're doing better than when the sanctions were started. They're doing better. We are doing worse. And so you're going to start to see in just a few days growing resentment against the leaders who are putting in the sanctions, because it's recognized the fallout that it's doing on the economies. And it's not hurting Russia at all. It's actually helping them solidify their position and solidifying the demand for the ruble, which is supposedly what the sanction was against in the first place. So we're reaching an interesting financial tipping point, which is by itself going to beg for action in the world to change the situation, right at the same time where the world is building towards sudden destruction and hostilities that are becoming very blatant. I mean, they're not hiding it at all about how close we are to World War III. But you'll also notice within just the past 10 days a certain increase in tempo of the war in Ukraine, which is really a proxy war between Russia and China and India and the US, EU, and NATO. It's really East versus West. But over the past 10 days, you've really seen things accelerate. Since February, the events have rolled out, which have built up to where we are now. But over the past few days, you can really see they're really going to a next stage. Russia is getting more intense with their operation there in Ukraine, in response to what the EU and America is doing in NATO. On the 26th, Germany will supply Ukraine with heavy weaponry. This is heavy weaponry, not just something carried by soldiers. It's going to be heavy weaponry like tanks and vehicles. So they've definitely taken things up a whole nother notch, and they're publicly admitting, yes, we are going to be giving heavy weaponry. So it's not Russia that is taking things to the next level. It's the EU and NATO who are saying, we are going to be throwing more chips on the table here. On the 28th, U.S. Congress approves the Lend-Lease Act for Ukraine, allowing most weapon types to be sent to Ukraine. It's not just the EU, it's America as well, saying, yes, we're going to start sending practically anything, any type of weapon that we have to Ukraine. All sorts of heavy weaponry. It's all on the table to send to Ukraine. It's very thinly veiled proxy war. Russia even publicly talks about they know it's a war between them and NATO. Same day, Germany voted overwhelmingly to approve sending heavy weapons and complex machinery to Ukraine. Again, publicly boasting about it. Yeah, we're sending heavy weaponry over to Ukraine to make the situation worse. May 1st, Poland starts large-scale, month-long military exercises across the country. This is right next to Ukraine. And this is very interesting when you consider how did this whole situation with Russia and Ukraine start. It started when Russia had some military exercises right on the border of Ukraine. And now Poland, which is also on the border of Ukraine, announces that they're going to have a month-long military exercises. And these are large-scale. They're so large-scale, they're even telling their populace, don't take photos of all the equipment that we're moving around. We don't want to give out social media information to the Russians. There's a lot more going on here, and things are definitely ramping up within the past few days. That the events in Ukraine are about to spill over beyond Ukraine. May 3rd, barrage of cruise missiles rock western Ukraine, plunging live in the darkness. Likely the biggest barrage since the beginning of the war. And so right now you're seeing a definite uptick in Russia's activity. They've been going slow and methodical over on the east of Ukraine, But now, particularly since the announcements of all these nations sending heavy weaponry and tanks and vehicles and howitzers and artillery pieces, now Russia is coming on a lot stronger, and they're now taking out bridges and railroad depots and power stations, which now changes and accelerates things in Ukraine because it hastens the fall of Ukraine. You see, it does not matter if Germany or Poland or anybody else gives heavy weaponry to Ukraine. And even Russia has openly said this, it's going to have a minimal effect because Ukraine's already low on diesel fuel. They hardly have fuel already to drive their tanks and equipment, their heavy weaponry that they already have. So if you give them more, they can't bring it from the west over to the east, which is where their main battlefield is. And now that the main train junctions are being destroyed too, you can't ship that heavy weaponry to the front lines where it's needed in the first place either. And because you're low on fuel, you can't truck it over there either. So we're at a point where all these European nations know Ukraine is losing. They know they're low on fuel. They know they have very few soldiers. They know they can't send reinforcements to those parts of their army that are surrounded, such as in Mariupol. They couldn't send any reinforcements to them because they're low on all that stuff. So the EU and NATO already knows Ukraine is losing already. So why are they giving heavy weaponry to a country that they know is losing? And by giving it to them, they know it's not going to help out anything. And Russia's accelerated its destroying of bridges and railroads, which means everything that they're giving is hardly going to go anywhere. Why are they doing this knowing Ukraine is losing? Because they don't care that it's losing. They want to pour gasoline on the fire. By giving the heavy weaponry, they're making the situation politically worse, knowing that they're going to be coming to loggerheads really soon because it's already clear that Ukraine's running on fumes right now. So it's not going to take much for Russia to really start accelerating its advances. And more to just really dispense of the proxy part and just get to the real contenders in the war in the first place. They know Ukraine is losing, and they're making it worse knowing that Ukraine is losing. Ukraine is vastly running out of fuel and soldiers and equipment, and you'll notice that they're going around asking for heavy equipment and heavy equipment and heavy equipment and planes, but they never ask for soldiers, which is the one thing that they're running out of. And they know they can't ask for soldiers because the moment that some other country's soldiers get involved, that country will become involved and Russia will attack them. They've openly said that. So they can't ask for more soldiers, which also tells you something. Ukraine is not getting any more soldiers. They're running out of soldiers. And you remember in the opening days of the war, millions of refugees fled Ukraine, which also means millions of military-aged men left Ukraine in the first few days. And that's why you see Ukraine conscripting very young people and very old people who normally wouldn't be soldiers, and they're sending them to the front lines because they have no other soldiers. They're running on fumes with soldiers, which means that right now they're low on soldiers, they can't send reinforcements, they have very little fuel, they are already at a breaking point right now. And Russia is now breaking the final railroads and bridges, the final infrastructure, and there's really not much that Ukraine can do about it. And sending heavy weaponry to Ukraine is not going to change the outcome at all at this point. We're at a very important tipping point, and Russia knows that, the EU knows that, Ukraine knows that. And Ukraine is in no position to do anything, but at the same tipping point, you're seeing the surrounding neighbor nations start to get very apprehensive and ready for War II, because on May 4th, Belarus holds surprise military drills, which also coincided with major drills hosted by its neighbors, Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia, which kicked off earlier this month. So here at this tipping point, they know that Ukraine is about to fall militarily. And things are about to go very hot very soon, and so things are ramping up in the surrounding countries. We are at a tipping point, and you're going to see the rhetoric about the anticipation of World War III breaking out very soon, because Ukraine is about to fall in one way or another. It is about to fall, or it's about to become blindingly obvious that it's already dead in the water already. And this is what we need to keep in mind when we zoom out a little bit, look on the timeline, look at the end of the 7-year warning when these things started, when the peace and safety warnings started going out. The same story warning about the same sudden destruction coming is still ongoing, and it's actually accelerating here as we are approaching this second iteration of the blood moon, which we were warned about last time of the great and terrible day of the Lord approaching. So we certainly see a ramp up, which also ties in right at the end of the Pilgrim parallel that we've also observed, with an understanding that judgment's coming even in that parallel. We do not know the day or hour, but we see a lot that causes us to be suspicious that that day is approaching a whole lot quicker than we realize. And as we look at the timeline, it also accentuates how close Ukraine is to a tipping point. Because when we see that the war was declared on February 24th, and then you had March and April 24th, that marked 60 days of conflict since Russia invaded Ukraine. Which means that Ukraine, with their very limited soldiers, their territorial defense that they're now having to send to the front lines because they're so low on soldiers, most of their soldiers have been fighting for over 60 days straight, with very little opportunity to rotate out soldiers. They can rotate them out and rest them for about a week at the most. They're so low on soldiers that they have to keep sending them back to the front lines. There's not a lot of time for rest and relaxation, rest and recovery, which any armed forces will tell you you cannot run your soldiers that hard before they collapse and fall apart in their effectiveness. And especially during World War II, this was really noticed that after about 60 days of continuous fighting, after 60 days, your soldiers really start to lose their effectiveness because they're so tired that they start to not care. And they're just so tired and weary and run down. You cannot run your soldiers for more than 60 days. You have to rotate them out with fresh troops. But Ukraine can't do that. Ukraine can't do that. And the armed forces also know once you get close to 80 days of running your soldiers hard, that's when they're going to pretty much lose all of their effectiveness. Because you're running them into the ground. Their body has to have time to recover. Their mind, mentally, they have to have time to recover. After about 60 days, you're going to see a huge drop-off in effectiveness of your soldiers, of your fighting forces. And especially by 80 to 90 days, they're not going to care. They're not going to be effective at all. So militarily, we're at a very important threshold, and you can also see why the other nations are suddenly doing military drills, because they know the fall in Ukraine is going to happen very quickly. And we've actually seen that just within the past week with the fall of Mariupol and the attack on the steelworks there. They had over 1,000 soldiers all of a sudden surrender because the Ukrainians, they're so tired of the war. And they've been running to the ground. They can't be given reinforcements. They can't rotate out. They can't be given more supplies of food and ammunition. So they already know they should be surrendering because the Ukrainian soldiers already know the war is over. The war is over. The Ukrainian soldiers already know that. Their body knows that. They know they can't keep going. They know it's only a matter of days and hours before they pretty much just have to all throw their hands up and say, we quit, we quit. And they know it's better to do that than die in a ditch somewhere. So we're at a point where even militarily, in context of the peace and safety warnings, and the warnings about sudden destruction coming, we see that things are about to drastically change. Because it's about to become drastically clear to the entire world that Russia is winning, hands down, in Ukraine. The sanctions have no power. NATO is powerless. So we're reaching a very close tipping point where NATO, the EU, and the US are going to have to do something. They're going to have to do something to prevent that. So we're at a very dangerous time right now on multiple levels, which should not surprise us that they have been building for this exact scenario of things just to fall apart royally. Right here at this very prophetic time that we see reminded on the Pilgrim parallels and the celestial clock of a warning by the peace and safety warnings, warning about this very same sudden destruction that is coming. We have so much that tells us we are running out of days and hours ourselves too. And the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. These have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. Everything right now is scripted, preparing the way to explain away the sun destruction, to lead right into the events of Revelation, to lead into the arrival and revealing of the beast. A worldwide deception will require a coordinated betrayal. And we particularly have seen this since the sun being turned into darkness and the moon into blood. We've suddenly seen the world leaders acting in collaboration, destroying their own countries with sanctions and things that the average person is saying, what are you doing? This is going to hurt us more than them. And the military choices that you're bragging about, you are inviting war. Why are you doing this? And yet they continue to press for the very things that they know will bring war. because they are of one mind, because they know what prophetic time it is, and they know what is coming. And this is the biblical perspective that we need to have when we look at the world's events. A biblical perspective, a prophetic perspective, a celestial perspective. Everything that the Lord has shown us on this learning journey is showing us what is the world coming to. And this is why we need to watch and be sober. Watch and be sober. Definitely review. The timeline links are in the description box. We are at an important time which tells us we are running out of time. Let us live as strangers and pilgrims here in this world, with a heart and affection set on things above, with also the promise that He is gone to prepare a place, and that He will come again and receive us, take us to where He is. Everything at this time reminds us how short on time we are, and also reminds us of how much our Father has shown us on this learning journey, because He wants us to know the time, and He wants us to live in light of the time. And this is what the Apostle Paul emphasized. So Christ was once offered to bear the sins of many, and unto them that look for Him shall He appear the second time, without sin unto salvation. As we understand what He has done for us, our Redeemer, we can more so look for Him, understanding what He did the first time, understanding there is going to be a second time. From henceforth expecting till His enemies be made His footstool. We know what's going to happen in the next chapter, and we will see that day approaching. And the Apostle Paul emphasizes, as we see that day approaching, because we have a new and living way, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, having our hearts sprinkled from an evil conscience and our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast the profession of our faith without wavering, for He is faithful that promised. And let us consider one another to provoke unto love and to good works, not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together, as the manner of some is, but exhorting one another, and so much the more, as ye see the day approaching. We see the day approaching. We see the day approaching because our Father has been the one who has shown us the day approaching. And that should cause our heart to rise and stir with love for our Redeemer as we hear His voice, as we see His hand at work, calling us, pleading us, and showing us that He is nigh even at the door. As ye see the day approaching, let us draw near to Him with a true heart. A true heart. And the Apostle Paul then leads right into chapter 11, reminding us that we are strangers and pilgrims. We are strangers and pilgrims. Let's live like it as we see the day approaching. Avail yourself of the PDF resources in the description box. Be ye ready. When to watch and running for the prize. How do we draw nigh to Him with a true heart, a genuine heart? How do we be on fire for our Lord? How do we be found with our loins girded, with our lamps burning? How do we be found with faith when the Son of Man comes? How do we be found with what is the substance of things hoped for as we look for Him to appear the second time? We will live in light of those promises. We will live as though He is coming. We will live as though we are strangers and pilgrims. We will live as though we are running for the prize. And we will press toward the prize. Friend, we have heard so many trumpet calls at midnight declaring, the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet Him. Do you hear Him? Rise up, go out to meet Him. And this is what we have seen, this is what we have heard, this is what we have felt in so many ways along this celestial learning journey. Our Father drawing us, drawing our heart, drawing our ear, drawing our eyes. Look up, lift up your heads, for your redemption draweth nigh. For your redemption draweth nigh. Live as though your beloved is drawing nigh. And so as we hear those trumpet calls at midnight, as we see the celestial signs, as we see the bright and morning star, as we see the celestial signs warning of that great and terrible day of the Lord approaching, reminding us of what the second chapter is when He's going to be coming the second time, starting to make His enemies His footstool. As we see all that, we will rise up, we will trim our lamps, we will shine bright, and we will go out to meet our beloved, hearing Him, heeding Him, loving Him, and serving Him, first and highest above all else, shining bright like the celestial lights, till He comes. Maranatha.